Right. Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody to today's event, Resilience Renewed, the Revival of Jewish Existence in Modern Germany with historian Anette Isaacs. My name is Ben Schacht, and I'm a member of the Chicago YIVO Society Board, and I am our programs chair. And the Chicago YIVO Society is an all-volunteer organization whose mission is to entertain and educate the local community through subsidized lectures, music programs, and film screenings that reflect the rich heritage and diversity of Jewish culture and to ensure the future of Yiddish through language education. Chicago YIVO Society is a local affiliate of the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research, and the acronym YIVO stands for Jiddischer Wissenschaftlicher Institut. Founded in 1925 in Vilna, Poland, now Vilnius, Lithuania, and based in New York City since 1940, YIVO is today the world's preeminent resource center for East European Jewish studies, Yiddish language, literature, and folklore, and the American Jewish immigrant experience. And since this year is 2025, we're celebrating 100 years of YIVO, founded 100 years ago in 1925. All of the programs that we do are free to the public, but of course they cost time and money and effort to organize. So if you like today's program, please consider donating to the Chicago YIVO Society, which you can do on our website, chicagoyivo.org. And there you can also learn about our upcoming events. And we do have another virtual event happening a week from today with author Jordan Chad, and he's the author of a new book, Christmas in Yiddish Tradition. So very seasonally appropriate event and book talk that will be happening again virtually at the same time a week from today. So I would now like very much to introduce our speaker, Anette Isaacs. And Anette is an historian and public educator currently based in Miami. She holds master's degrees in American Studies, Political Science, and History, and is currently serving as the director of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, OLLI, at Florida International University. And so with that, it's my privilege to hand it over to Anette for today's event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben, and thank you everyone for logging on this Sunday afternoon. As we already said, yes, I am a German lady. I was born in Germany. I grew up there, and I have been living here in America for the last almost 20 years. And I do a lot of presentations. This year, I did about 180 presentations about German history, German culture. And this one is, of course, both. It's a timely topic, right? But it also, of course, is a topic that is interesting because we are looking at the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. And it's always interesting to look at the Jewish community in Germany right now. And not only right now, because next year, which would be 2026, we have 1700, like 1705 years actually of the Jewish community in the German territories. So it happened in 321 that the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great issued this edict that you see here that was legislating that Jews could and should hold municipal offices in the Curia. And the Curia at that time was the municipal administration of the city of Cologne. So historians agree that this edict is definite evidence that Jewish communities have been an integral part of European culture as far back as late antiquity. And we, of course, all know, that the Nazi Germany had this horrible goal to eradicate all Jewish life from Germany and also from Europe. However, that goal was never met. And so here we see today, when we think about the Jewish community in Germany, it's the third largest Jewish community in Western Europe. The only ones that are larger are Great Britain and France. And then it also is the second fastest growing Jewish community in Europe. And I can imagine that some of you are looking at those facts and you are thinking, why? How could this have happened in Germany of all places? And so in the next, I would say maybe 60 minutes, we're going to discuss how this could happen. And we are also going to look at the feelings and the attitudes that Jewish Germans nowadays have towards the country they are living in and especially also towards this horrible legacy. So when the Second World War ended 80 years ago in May of 1945, the Germans were defeated, but of course that price for that defeat was horribly high. Most of Europe lay in ruins and more than 60 million people had lost their lives. And then of course, especially, in the spring and summer of 1944, the horror of the Holocaust became abundantly clear. About 67% of Europe's and Russia's entire Jewry had been killed by the Nazis. And the situation of the German Jews was very abysmal. Before the war, there were about 500,000 German Jews that had lived in Germany. By 1946, that number was down to about 220,000. But most of those were the so-called displaced persons. So these were people that were coming from Poland and the Soviet Union. We really only had about 15,000. So from 500,000 down to 15,000 German Jews. Half of them lived in the city of Berlin. And in total, the Holocaust had taken the lives of 165,000 German Jews. And the rest were the ones that had fled, that were then living in other places. The overwhelming majority of these DPs or these survivors had lost everything. Many were the sole survivors of their own entire families. And what they did have was their lives. As you can see here, this is a teenage Auschwitz survivor who is writing a letter to his relatives. And there he says, I can tell you one thing, with a lot of luck, we stayed alive. I was in Auschwitz, Buchenwald, etc. Main thing is one was alive. And truly, life had to go on in the Jewish communities. And so they were kind of busy with picking up the pieces and trying to rebuild life for their members that came close to normalcy. And how do you usually do it? You do it with rituals, you do it with routines. And so the war was,
Okay.
excuse me, you have to let me just kind of make sure that everybody is muted here. Mute. Oh, I can't mute everybody here. I have to make sure. Jeffrey is not muted. Please, Jeffrey, mute yourself. So what happened was that that was a Tuesday, by the way, May 8th. So the war in Europe is over on May 8th. And exactly on this day, as an act of defiance and triumph, you have the first wedding, the first Jewish wedding that is celebrated in the Jewish community in Berlin. On May 12th was the first religious service in a synagogue. And even one day earlier, May 11th, the first bris was taking place in the still functioning Jewish hospital. They have the newspaper in Berlin, Der Weg, The Path. It was a Jewish newspaper that was published again, and it was full of announcements, such as the one by an orthopedic doctor who was announcing the reopening of his practice by simply writing "back from Auschwitz." You have other indicators of a return to normalcy when it comes to the Jewish community, especially in Berlin, by kind of thinking about the fact that from July 1st, 1945 to March 31st, 1946, the community counted 11 circumcisions, 7 bar mitzvahs, and 22 weddings. We also have the first kosher butcher shop in Berlin, reopened in early 1946. The Jewish communities were working together very closely with international help organizations, and they, of course, were mostly the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. And they were the ones, that were not only helping the DPs, the displaced persons in all those DP camps. They were mostly in the south of Germany, more like in the Bavarian region. But also here we see Jewish Berliners who were also being helped, by with like donations from the joint. And so here, for example, we see matzah that was coming from the United States. And so when it comes to the displaced person camps on German soil, you see where they are. They are mostly in Bavaria, in the Frankfurt, also, in the American zone, because Germany, of course, was occupied, and the Americans had the South. And these were, these DP camps were usually reappropriated soldiers' barracks. Sometimes there were hotels, or there were settlements that were built in the 1920s or 30s for industrial workers. Sometimes they were using former schools and hospitals. There were just kind of, lots of different places in order to be able to house the displaced persons. And here, for example, we have some pictures from the Berlin Wannsee. So this Berlin also had a big camp. And what happened in these camps was there was first a remarkable marriage boom, and then usually 10 months later, you had a baby boom that was happening. So between 1945 and 1947, there was a huge camp that was in the British zone. And in those 2 years, between 45 and 47, that camp counted 1,000 weddings. And then when it comes to the babies, what we have interesting numbers for these camps in the Bavaria area. Let's say, starting in August of 1946, we have about 750 babies that were being born every month in those camps alone. And not only that, we also, of course, also when it came to the older children, those DP camps really developed into Jewish communities of their own, when we have also schooling, like many, because remember, you have like almost 200,000 Jewish DPs, who are kind of living together, and they are, of course, are hoping that they are at one point going to be able to kind of leave that blood-soaked earth, of Germany, and go to either the United States, or at one point they were hoping that Israel, was going to be founded. And so we see here children learning, but they also had the possibility of, kind of learning an instrument and so on. So in April of 1946, the Anglo-American Committee was asking lots of DPs, over 138,000 people, where or which country would you like to immigrate to? And the answer was 85%, actually, who said Palestine. This is what they wanted. And then, of course, when 1948 was coming along, and with it, the opportunity to leave Germany and start a new life, either in the United States or in Eretz Israel, the overwhelming majority took this opportunity. So here we see them, of course, being very happy at the train station. And they were first leaving on trains for France. And then, of course, they were taking the ship, usually from Genoa. And we have about 7,000 DPs staying back. And they are, in a way, kind of adding, to those 15,000 German Jews. And what is so interesting is that we have the Jewish community in Germany after the Second World War. We have several groups that are making this up. We have the aforementioned, DPs, which were usually Eastern European Jews. Then we have the German Jews that survived or that were coming back from exile. And then in later decades, we have immigrants that have been coming to Germany from various countries. Since the 1950s, actually. They were coming from Hungary, also Israel, Iran, Czechoslovakia. And then, of course, quite massively in the 1990s, they were coming from the Soviet Union. So we're going to talk about that, of course, a little later. But this, I think, is pretty fascinating, because you see the diversity of the Jews in Germany, because that was also encouraged by the geographical circumstances. Because thanks to the fact that the DP camps were located in the American zone, in that southern Germany, right? So southern Germany became home from Jews from Eastern Europe, whereas northern and western Germany were traditionally the homes of the German Jews. And we see that here very impressively, because when you look at it, 93.7% of Jews in Bavaria and 81.6% of all Jews in Württemberg, which is the area where Stuttgart is, they are from Eastern Europe. But the percentage of Eastern European Jews in the Jewish communities in other German states is quite fascinating, because you have only 28% of them are in Berlin. So you have mostly like German Jews, that sometimes people also called the Jeckes. Then in Lower Saxony would be 23%, in North Rhine-Westphalia, 23%. But then in Rhineland-Palatine, that's interesting because that's only really 13%. So we have 87% that are the German Jews, because these are these very kind of long traditional, yeah, like Jewish communities that are like, Speyer and Worms and all of that. So yeah. And so then one of the issues, I have to say that in many cases, the Eastern European Jews and the German Jews, they did not really get along too well, because they also did have different religious orientations, because the German Jews were for the most part members of the more liberal and conservative Jewry, but these Jews that had been coming from Poland and Russia that were now living in Bavaria, they were much more Orthodox. And so in 1950, the founding of the Central Council of Jews in Germany tried to bridge these differences, because now there were about, when you think of it, 17,000 Jews who were living in Germany that belonged to the community and that were represented by the Central Council. There were also, so it's kind of difficult to actually count every person who is Jewish, because we do have an unspecified number of Jews that refused to become members of the Jewish community, because either, because could be that they just didn't want to, or they didn't want to pay the taxes, or whatever. So in order to bring back further normalcy between 1950 and 1967, we have 40 synagogues that were either built or reconstructed in West Germany. Here we see a photo of the reopening of the synagogue in Munich with a rabbi by the name of Orenstein. And then this is a picture of the laying of the foundation stone ceremony at the Jewish Community Center in Berlin. And you know what's interesting? This man that you see here holding the hammer, that is Heinz Galinski. Heinz Galinski was a very important person with the German Jewish community. He was the head of the community in Berlin for over 50 years. So he was very influential. But then behind him, not the man there behind him with the hats, but the one right next behind him there. This is Willy Brandt. This is our German. Later on in 1969, he became the German chancellor, actually. So Willy Brandt at that time was the governing mayor of the city of West Berlin. So, and that is why he was there for this important event. Here we see what this looks like. It's a very spiritual place. And so then we have, by the late 1940s, we have, very interesting, 100 Jewish communities that are existing again in Germany. Of course, you can imagine that if you really only have around 17,000 Jewish people, these communities are not going to be big. We have the biggest one in Berlin. We have about 3,000 members in Munich. There's also a relatively big one in Frankfurt. But there were, many of them were numbered fewer than 50 members. And in you can imagine, when it comes to living in Germany, that of course that was also known at the time as the land of the perpetrators, that did present special challenges for Jewish people, especially in light I mean, of what happened, right? You have, first of all, you have like feelings of guilt, that survivors were kind of plagued by feelings of guilt. They were, of course, also plagued by hatred, for what happened and for the Germans. And then this idea that they had to all of a sudden have to live, among Germans. But then on the other hand, it was at the end of the day, it had been their home for many, many centuries. So it was really a thing. And so, in many cases, especially those German Jews, they were battling that bad conscience for staying in Germany and not emigrating to Israel. And for many years, you had a special dictum, and that was, we are sitting on packed suitcases. So this is something that we have to remember, because that kind of sentence is really going up to what happens right now. This idea of we are sitting on packed suitcases, meaning that Jewish people were not even entertaining the idea that they could actually stay in Germany for on a long-term basis while they were actually staying for a long-term basis. And there's another interesting fact, so that even if a Jewish person, had a career and made good money, people of Jewish faith were very often renting apartments after the war. They did not really want to buy apartments, even if they would have been able to kind of buy a house or buy something. They didn't want that, because they were thinking, no, we're not doing that. We're not having any roots in a country that in a second could kind of throw us out again. So that's really interesting. So there was a survey done in 1964. There was the director of the Jewish Youth Center in Frankfurt. His name was Walter Jacob Oppenheimer, and he was working on his PhD. And so he was looking at the young kids in his youth center, and he was analyzing 274 questionnaires, because he was asking them, fill this out. And so these were kids between the ages of 9 and 18. And so he was asking them, where would you most like to live? And so you can see, and these kids were all born in Germany, of course, after the war, because this is from 1964, and they were between 9 and 18. So they were all born in Germany. And you see that nobody wanted to be there. You have only 8% who said, yeah, I'm at the right place. You have 73% who said Israel, and then 18% who said the United States. And so then, some years later, there was another opinion poll done, and this is even more abysmal. Here we have 255 Jews that were asked this question, like, do you think that Germany should be your homeland? And we have 84% that state that they did not feel that Germany was their homeland. And among the young people, the percentage was actually as high as 95% or 94.5%. But a completely different picture arises from a 1990 opinion poll. Here we have 377 Jews that were asked. And now we have a different picture, because now we have 56% that are rejecting the statement that Israel was their real homeland. And despite their bond with Jewish culture, 64% regarded themselves above all as Germans. So clearly, over the decades, the Jewish community or Jewish population in Germany was able to, at least to a certain extent, overcome the terrible memories of the past. And they were able to manage to feel at least somewhat at home in the country that had been responsible for these unspeakable atrocities. We, of course, also have to see that this is now, when in 1990, when these people are being asked, this might have have been now the third generation, right? So these were maybe even not the children of the survivors, but maybe even the grandchildren of the survivors. But of course, what is also important to remember is that the Jews in Germany did feel isolated because there was such a backlash of criticism and hatred that was thrown at them by other international Jewish groups, because those Jews could just not understand why on earth you would actually live where, in the land of the murderers. And so this is what Heinz Galinski was kind of dealing with a lot. Heinz Galinski, I just mentioned him. He was the head of the community for over 50 years in Berlin. And he was kind of constantly asked, how could you, and you were even a survivor, how can you, live in Germany? And so this is what he says. I have always represented the point of view that the Wannsee Conference, which was, of course, that terrible meeting there in 1942, at which the extermination of the Jews was planned, cannot be the last word in the life of the Jewish community in Germany. Therefore, I participated with a few others to restore the Jewish community in Berlin. I have never been one of those who considered the community here a liquidation community, but rather I have endeavored to give back to the survivors the belief in a restored new life. And there was another very powerful letter that I also found in my research, and that was by a Jewish Berliner who was writing about this whole topic in Der Weg, which means the path. We are not leaving because we believe we are good and true Germans. Germans who received their cultural training in German schools heard the word of God in German from a Jewish mouth of the rabbis and hear it still, and are not ashamed to announce that Germany is our fatherland and German is our mother tongue. I and people like me are staying in Germany because we do not want to leave, because no lunatic fool, no tempter should or could rob us of our German homeland, our Germany, which of course is absolutely true, But then on the other hand, you of course have this. I think this is it's a defiant, it's a very, it's an attitude of a hero, I mean, because how dare the Nazis. And so that is something, that attitude that this man here is this playing was not going over well, let's say that, with the World Jewish Congress, because in July of 1948, the World Jewish Congress issued a warning to the Jews of the world to never again settle on the blood-soaked German soil. And in order to teach those Jews a lesson who remained in Germany, the WJC excluded all German members. And then we also have a situation in August of 1950 where the Jewish Agency issued an ultimatum to all German Jews. And they said, you are immediately packing your bags, speaking of sitting on your suitcases, you're packing your suitcases, and we give you 6 weeks to leave Germany for Israel. And then, of course, that this didn't happen because there were German Jews who wanted to be in Germany. And so in addition, it was also difficult for the communities to find rabbis who actually wanted to be there. By 1960, only 7 rabbis served the entire country. Can you imagine? You have only 7 rabbis, along with 4 to 5 non-academic rabbis that had been trained in Poland. And so it was not unusual that a rabbi had like a whole German state that he had to service. So, and that is, of course, when this creation of that Central Council of of Jews, they were really trying to ease the tension a little bit. And then over the decades, it did work. The thing also is that one has to say that the German Jews stayed very staunch supporters of the state of Israel, especially also when it came to financial contributions. They were among the leading financial supporters of Israel. Only American Jews were giving more than the German Jews. And the support was taken very seriously by the community members and by the organizers. And it was expected that community members would donate at least 10% of their yearly income to the Zionist cause. And then one of the other problems, of course, was that over the years and over the decades, when we now move into, let's say, the 1980s, you have a lot of interfaith marriages because you have just the Jewish community in Germany is so small that, of course, even, many were doing the birthright thing and they were going to Israel and they were having like little meetings, little like dating situations. It's still, we do have 88%. That's a high number, 88% of Jews in Germany that were over the years marrying non-Jewish partners. And you would think, that all of this is not kind of boding well and that the Jewish community is getting littler and littler and fewer. But then something happened at the end of the 1980s that really changed this around so much. And that was this. That was actually the fall of the Berlin Wall. And not only that, but also the German unification and also the fall of communism as a whole. Because overall, the Jewish community in Germany has undergone a tremendous evolvement in the last 35 years. Nobody would have thought that this could actually be possible because nothing really pointed into this direction. If you take a look at these numbers, you see that for decades, really, like let's say from the early 1960s, where we have about 22,078 Jewish people, to, let's say, almost like the early 90s, it stays relatively stable. Like or let's say in the 70s, like 26,000, then we have 27,000. But then look what happens in the late 1990s. Then it goes up and up and up. And by 2001, it's almost 87,756. And this, of course, comes from the Russian Jews, from the people who were coming from, the Soviet Union. And many of them actually were also coming to this country. They were coming to America and, of course, also to Israel. So altogether, I can tell you that between 1989 and 2005, you have about 1 million Russian Jews who were immigrating to Israel. 400,000 were coming to the United States, and about 200,000 actually were coming to Germany, of all places. So here we have some of the changes that were happening to the communities, especially, from the mid 1980s to the 1990s, when the first big wave had been arriving. And look, there were areas like, for example, if you take a look at Osnabrück, which is an area in the western part, they had 80 people in their community in 1984. And then 10 years later, it was tenfold, 867. Or Recklinghausen is also, in the Ruhr area, about close to Cologne and Düsseldorf. 53 people they had, and then it went up to 863. So this, of course, did also bring problems, you can imagine, because first of all, these were Russians, right? These were Jewish people who did not speak German. And of course, those people here were also not really speaking Russian very well. And then, of course, the other thing that also happened is, and there we are back at the fact that when we are talking about the community in Germany also being mostly Orthodox. So as we all know, like the Orthodox communities are, of course, looking at the halakha, right? And they are saying that, of course, a Jew has to have a Jewish mother, or he has to be converted by an Orthodox rabbi. And many of the Russian Jews were actually patrilineal Jews, and they were not taken in by those Orthodox communities. And that is really a problem, because on the one hand, the Jewish communities were like, oh, no, nobody's living here anymore. Nobody wants to be Jewish. And then, when they come and when they say, well, I mean, I do actually have a father, then they were like, no, you're not halakhically correct. And so that's why we don't really consider you Jewish. So that was something that many of the Russian Jews were not happy about, right? And then so yeah, so we now have, of course, this is like 35 years ago or 30 years ago. So now what we have is, because of that influx of Russian Jews, and of course they have been now living in Germany for 30 years or even longer. They have their children, even those children, they have their own children. So it's a whole new a whole new future that has been created, when it comes to the Jewish communities. And we do have also now colleges that we did not have 20 or 30 years ago. So this is the Touro College in Berlin. And there's also one, I want to say Brooklyn, but I do know that it is in the New York area. So there's the original Touro College. But there, as you can see here, you can do a Master's of Arts of Holocaust Communication and Tolerance. Then we have the Central Council, of course, in Germany, that runs a college too, and that is affiliated with the University of Heidelberg. Then we have the School of Jewish Theology that is in Potsdam, that is affiliated with the Abraham Geiger College. And so we do have not only, this academic part of it, but we also are a very, very devoted, or one could say, to not only Holocaust education, but also kind of showing the Jewish dimension of, German history, of German culture. And for that, this person was quite important, because this is Daniel Libeskind, who is a Polish American architect. And so he created this. So that, of course, is the Jewish Museum in Berlin. And that has been, for the last certainly over 20 years, has been considered one of the most daring and exciting buildings in the last decade. And why? You can imagine, first of all, you have this kind of brutalist architecture. But then, on the other hand, when you think about your first kind of thought, when you think about a Jewish museum in Germany, you think, oh, this must be all about the Holocaust. But it actually isn't. Yes, of course, the Holocaust is playing a part, but this museum has a significant collection of, of the many contributions that Jewish citizens in Berlin and in Germany did to culture, did to history, did to society before the Holocaust, Peter Eisenman, I just looked him up, he's alive. As you can see, he's 93. Peter Eisenman created very early on in basically 2005, it was opened. This is Peter Eisenman, the architect of the Jewish memorial that we have in Berlin. The official title is the Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe. And this stands, right where the Brandenburg Gate is, and it's right in the middle of the city. And um, we have a lot of people who actually are not happy about this because they are thinking that this is like an oversized cemetery, but it really kind of isn't. It does have 2,700 of these steles that are made from high quality self compacting concrete, but they are really the idea of it is certainly not a cemetery. It is something different. You should go there because let me just read to you what he actually wants to actually achieve with this. So he's setting out to create a place of loss and contemplation. This memorial is also geared towards irritating and confusing the spectator. It is inviting, but it's also menacing at the same time. And it is continuous because it does not have an entrance and it does not have an exit. And he says that this memorial, there's no goal to this. There's no end, there's no beginning, there's no working one's way in or out. The duration of an individual's experience of it grants no further understanding, since understanding anyway is not possible. So I think if you have never been to Berlin, you should visit this because this is really an experience. Not only are you walking through, these steles, but you also are going downstairs because in the like underground, this is where the education is taking place, right? Because this is basically where they have a Holocaust museum with that, and they are basically working together with Yad Vashem. And Yad Vashem in Israel was providing them with a database and with all other information. And so that is where literally millions of people, of tourists and people in school classes and so on, this is where they come and visit not only the memorial, but also that museum that is underground, basically. So now, when we look at what's happening now, so here we see lots of communities, but, about 107. They are representing a little bit more than 100,000 individual members. And you think, didn't we just say that there were nowadays we have about 200,000 Jewish people? Yes, because there are still, we're kind of thinking that there are about 40 to 50% of the Jews in Germany right now who aren't members of the communities, and therefore they are not really represented by the Central Council. Among them, for example, are about 24,000 Israelis, that are living in Germany, mostly in Berlin. Some years back, a very interesting book was published in Germany, and that is called Jews in Germany, Germany within the Jews. And that, unfortunately, they did not translate that into English, but it has 40 articles and essays by Jewish writers, historians, and scholars. And it's very fascinating because what you can see there is that there are apparently two major schools of thought within today's Jewish academics. We have, on the one hand, the group that voices their sadness and their regret about the tremendous transformation that the Jewish community in Germany has undergone since it was, in a way, for lack of a better word, overrun by the Russian Jews, right? And then there is this other group, and this other group says, no, don't be silly. So, for example, Professor Michael Wolfsong, so he is from Munich, for example, and he has the following observation, because he says that post-Holocaust Jewry in Germany is decidedly Jewish, and it also positions itself as Jewish. which makes it fundamentally different from the pre-war German Jews that were far more interested in assimilation. As Wolfson writes in his essay there, the new Jews in Germany want to be Jews. So it is about, celebrating Jewishness. It is not about, you know what, I actually want to assimilate, and yeah, just because I am Jewish, I don't really want to talk about it. It is no, loud and proud, right? And so there's also, because of the fact that we have like over 84 million people now living in Germany and then 200,000 Jews. So you can imagine that there are still lots of Germans who don't really know Jewish people because they don't, they never met them. And so we do, on the one hand, have that going on, but on the other hand, we have a big interest in Jewish culture. Like, for example, we have a klezmer festival. Then everybody loves a bagel. So that is something that, especially in the big cities, we have these bagel shops. Recently, a kosher hotel opened up in Berlin. Then here, this is what I mentioned briefly, that there are about 24,000 Israelis or people that are connected with Israel that are living in Berlin at the moment. And so much of this, when it comes to what's the most famous architectural representation of the Jewish community, it would be this, because this is the Centrum Judaicum in the Mitte district of Berlin. And this was once Germany's largest synagogue, but it was destroyed in the war. And then when the building was restored in the late 1980s to early 1990s, it was repurposed as the seat for the Berlin Jewish Community Administration. They also added a museum. They added like a research center, and they added a small prayer room, like a small synagogue for a congregation that is headed by this rabbi. And Geza Ederberg has been the rabbi for this for many years. I mean, I remember definitely I would say since almost 20 years, she has been the rabbi there, which of course you can imagine, this is not an Orthodox group, right? And so, yeah, she actually she studied in New York. She was ordained in Israel. And when it comes to the largest synagogue, that is this one here. This is Enriquestraße in former East Berlin, and that houses 1,200 people. It was built originally in 1903. The Orthodox Chabad Lubavitch community in the western part of the city, they opened this synagogue here. And then we have another one. I'm going to show you another one in just a second. But then this one is a very beautiful one in Dresden, in the city of Dresden. And you can see, when it comes to the architectural beauty, it's all very modern. For example, this one I thought was also quite interesting. That's a synagogue in Chemnitz, and even a Jewish community center, a JCC they have there. And that was built in 2002. This is the one in Munich. That one I have visited too. This is beautiful, the one in Munich. And then this is one of the more recent ones, September 2010 in Mainz. And look at that. I mean, the the architects are really quite daring there. And there you see, at the time, we had a German president by the name of Wolf. And at the opening ceremony, he says, a symbol of trust in our nation. And I think at that time, he also said that that we are so proud as Germans to realize that many people, many Jewish people want to unpack their suitcases. So that was really a very moving sentence, especially in light of what we were talking about earlier. So all of that happiness, one has to say, was yeah, came to a little bit of a halt because we also, of course, have some problems, right? And so in 2015, we had something that we were calling the refugee crises. And so that meant that 1 million refugees from war-torn Syria, from Afghanistan, and so they were coming to Germany. And unfortunately, some of them, certainly, I certainly don't want to say all of them, but some of them were then using this opportunity to actually, yeah, kind of commit anti-Semitic acts in Germany. And that, of course, is something that we absolutely do not like at all. Because, believe us, or me, we have our own problems, with anti-Semitism. We don't really need more anti-Semitism in Germany. And so here you see what I'm talking about. And that is the so-called Alternative for Germany, that is a far-right party. And while this party, so this is it's very scary because on the one hand, they have the chutzpah to look around and claim that they oppose anti-Semitism, but that is not true at all because you have many of its members that are spreading troubling rhetoric, including like Holocaust trivialization, conspiracy-laden references to global elites, and false historical comparisons that distort Nazi history. I mean, it's really bad. This party has particularly strong support in the eastern part of Germany, where it often wins a significant share of the votes, and that is what's making it so influential. And it's also difficult to ignore. Jewish communities, like, for example, the Central Council of Jews in Germany, have also called the AfD a party for anti-Semites. And Germany's own security agency now classifies it as right-wing extremist. And this has contributed to a sense of insecurity for many Jews in Germany, with rising anti-Semitic incidents, with vandalism, and so on. And so even with those pressures that are happening, the Jewish communities are continuing to grow. They are thriving. They are renewing themselves. But we are, of course, looking at France, right? And we're thinking, yikes, are we going to be vulnerable? And are Jews, or will Jews still be safe in Germany? So for that, we can say that, of course, when it comes to the German official line, of the German government, absolutely yes, So that was our former chancellor, Olaf Scholz, who then, of course, immediately after October 7th was visiting Israel and was saying, German history, our responsibility in the wake of the Holocaust means that it is our duty to stand up for the existence of the state of Israel. I mean, we never falter, when it comes to that. But Germany is a democracy. It's a country where you do have freedom of speech, and so that is, of course, why we also had quite a few of the pro-Palestinian demonstrations. But we also have, of course, pro-Jewish demonstrations too. And then last year, there was a new synagogue that was opened in Potsdam. And not the chancellor, but the president at the time was saying Germany remains a home for Jews. And that was really, it is always such an important sign, to show this. Look at this. This is very, very moving because I don't know if everybody here knows that is, of course, our Brandenburg Gate, which is the embodiment of Germany. And this is a picture of the spring. And this is Naftali Bennett. Of course, many of you are familiar with Naftali Bennett, who visited Munich. And this lady that he talks to is Charlotte Knobloch, who was not only a Holocaust survivor, but who for many years has been the president of the Munich Jewish community. So they seem very friendly with each other. We have a new law in Germany, and that is a law, or let's say an addition. And so in Germany, of course, if you want to become a citizen, you have to do a citizen test. So this is the same what people here, if they want to become American citizens, they have to do a test, and that test has questions about history and culture and so on. And you can see here that from now on, the German citizen test will be amended with questions about the history of Israel and why Germany has such a responsibility to the state of Israel, because this is very important. We, as German people, want to make sure that the people who come from other places and live in Germany know, that we have a very special responsibility to the state of Israel. And as you can see here, it's a reflection of how strongly Germany sees support of Israel as part of its own identity. We had a wonderfully joyful moment a couple of years ago. That was when the largest Chabad center, the largest since the Holocaust, was opened up in Berlin with the world's largest mezuzah. And here we have the person behind that, and that is Rabbi Teichtal. He has always been, he has been in Germany for many years, and he has always been such a joy. And he says there are millions of Germans who don't even know what Jews are. And he says, let's have positive cooperation face to face through dialogue, through shared, positive, joyful, lively, future oriented Jewish life. And so you see, I kind of did the math a little bit. We have right now 1 in 420 people is Jewish. And in the USA, it's very different. Look, because there 1 in 44 people is Jewish. And in a country where we do have like 84 million people right now, we actually have more Buddhists in Germany than Jewish people. That is pretty astonishing. And it really is something that, of course, it's very difficult for us to really get this and like, what? But in Germany, there are people who have never met a Jew, and they don't know what a challah is, and they don't know anything about anything. And so this is something that the Jewish community is kind of trying to do. So this idea of educating the people, educating the majority of German people, and kind of saying, we're just like normal people, or for example, here, this is Carnival is of course something that is very important especially for Western Germany. Like in January and February, everybody is running around, being like, like Mardi Gras kind of thing. And so here we actually have a Mardi Gras group that is made out of Jewish men, and they are, and as you can see here, Schalomchen Köln, which is Cologne, which is on the, on the thing here. What's that called? Like a train or something. We also have the Jewish, that's from the Central Council, that is also thinking about, it's all about educating people, because that's the thing. Because if you are actually, making sure that that people know more about you and more about your culture, that is a very effective way to combat the anti-Semitism. And so here there's this organization that is yeah, renting out Jews, one could say. Rent a Jew, it was called. And these were like Jewish girls who were coming to elementary schools. And they were saying, let me just tell you. So we are Jewish people, and what are you and what are you? And then some would say, I'm Catholic or I'm Muslim or whatever. And then, they would ask, just kind of things that are super normal for us here, there, people are like, oh, this is so fascinating. I've never even heard about it, And then here we have, this was some years ago, actually, the Jewish Museum had an exhibition, and that was called The Whole Truth, Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Jews. And so people who were coming to this exhibition, they were able to, ask questions. And so as you can see here, this question says, how does a kippah stay on? And this has nothing to do with like anti-Semitism or philo-Semitism or whatever. It is just like an honest interest that just people have who sadly have never really, been in close contact with Jewish people. And then, of course, the other part of that sentence is because their grandparents killed the Jewish people. I mean, it's really pretty astonishing. And then here we have the exhibition. Fox News, of course, was caddily dubbing this Jew in a box because they, as you can see here, they had that kind of plexiglass box where a member of the Jewish community was sitting and was saying, hey, you have a question? And Madeleine Albright, when she was still alive, she visited the exhibition and she became a part of it. And people found it just like absolutely fascinating, about to kind of hear about her experience and so on. So we also, of course, have Holocaust education that's happening in Germany. And that is especially important for German, of course, our German students. But not only that, also because of the fact that, of course, Germany now is a multicultural society. And so that is why we also have, projects that are making sure that Muslim students are also coming to these places and that because the thing about the Muslim students is, of course, that they are living in Germany, but they don't really see the German view. They, of course, are much more taking the Palestinian view and not the German view. They are, and so that is something that we also have. And I would like to more or less end with Shlomit. Shlomit is a puppeteer, and she bridges gaps, as you see here. And so she is, of course, an Israeli lady who lives in Germany, and she creates these puppets. And so with these puppets, she goes to all kinds of kindergartens and elementary schools and so on. And so she is really starting so early, in people's lives to really make sure that the young kids are kind of realizing that we are basically all the same. And so here we see, look, the girl is called Aisha, and then the boy with the kippah is Shlomo. And then Aisha says, oh, I have to go now. I have Quran class in a few minutes. And then Shlomo says, oh, I know about that. I have Torah class tomorrow. So really kind of bringing this home that we are basically all the same. So, ladies and gentlemen, in the last hour, we certainly heard lots of information, some of it sad, but the story of the Jews in Germany is not a narrative of decline. It is a story of rebirth, and first and foremost, a story of persistence, right? And so after the horrors of the Holocaust, after the decades of suppression, after anti-Semitism, after war, the Jews in Germany today are rebuilding, and they are not only rebuilding numerically through immigration, through birth, through growth, but also spiritually and culturally and socially. And they are founding new institutions, they are creating communities, they are engaging youth, they are making Judaism visible again, and they are insisting that Jewish identity is a part and an important part of Germany's present and of Germany's future. And so I thank you so much, for listening to my presentation. And I'm now going to stop the share so that we can maybe see each other and see if you have a question. You can, of course, unmute yourself, I think, or if you want to, you can also put your question in the chat. So let's see. Uh, so let's see. And so there's one question. It's my understanding that by 1950, only Föhrenwald in the American sector remained as a DP camp. Most Jewish refugees had, as you mentioned, immigrated to Israel by then, but some, like my family and I, were still in Föhrenwald, waiting to come to America under the US quota, which we finally achieved in 1951. Oh, very interesting. So Föhrenwald actually was open until 1957. So that really was the one camp that was, open the latest. And yeah, then they were closing it until only in 1957. And then what fraction of the Jews living in Germany were of German origin as opposed to coming from the East, where anti-Semitism may have been worse? So, right, so that's the big question, Right now, yeah, it definitely is, I would say, 10%, 10 to 15%, and then the rest would actually be the Russian Jews. And the Israelis too. The Israelis are certainly more than 10% now of the Jewish community in Germany. So if we have 24,000 Israelis and we have 200,000 Jews, then they are definitely more than 10%. Yeah, but this is definitely true, the overwhelming amount. But then, of course, these people, the Russian Jews have been German Jews, for the last 30 or almost 35 years. So they have, become part of our German society. And then Shana said, sorry, I didn't finish my message. I meant to add that by 1950, the other DP camps had closed. Yeah. That is true, because as Jews left for other countries, the existing camps were consolidated. This is why we lived in 6 different DP camps, waiting to be reached for the US quota. As I recall, the Jewish communities in the DP camps did not see themselves as German, the way German Jews returning from the concentration camps or from Russia, where they had fled in 1939 or 1940. My father worked in the DP camp, but some men in the DP camps, like my friend's father, did prefer to go to Munich for work only. Their main affiliations were in the DP camps. Yeah, that's exactly it. So the German Jews were, of course, not in the camps, because the German Jews were, of course, seen as like German citizens. They were not displaced persons in that sense. So there was not, in the beginning, there wasn't a big collaboration between them, because the DP, the displaced persons were helped, yes, by the joint. But yeah, the joint was then, first of all, helping them, but they also then helped the German Jews. And plus, when we think about the fact that out of 500,000 German Jews, only 15,000 survived, or not survived, because the majority, of course, had all already left before or during the war, but that we have kind of a group, let's say, of 15,000 who were staying in Germany. That is not a lot. Any other questions or comments? I love the
Maybe.
fact, yeah, yeah.
Well, I was wondering, thank you, Annette, for your really informative presentation. I was curious if you, in your research, learned anything about Yiddish in Germany, and whether Yiddish culture in the displaced persons camps, or how Yiddish culture might have been brought by Eastern European Jews who came to Germany, and sort of the state of maybe the revival of Yiddish culture in Germany today.
Yeah, so the really good thing about Yiddish is that, of course, 80% of it is German. And so we, of course, all have vast understanding of it. So that's really great. But yeah, so one of the things that was happening quite a bit, especially in these DP camps, was that they were thinking, okay, so not everybody knows how to speak Yiddish, uh, but there was like a language, like almost like a Babylonic language chaos going on, because some of them really only spoke, Ukrainian, and then others spoke Russian, and then, but of course, many spoke Yiddish and so on. And so that is why actually in those camps, they decided that the language that everybody should learn, not only the children, but also the grown-ups, was actually Hebrew. And so, because they also, of course, so many of them were also hoping that Palestine would at one point become Israel, and so they were thinking, we are getting ready, to at one point go there, and so that's why it was mostly Ivrit and not really Yiddish that they were then encouraging to do. But yeah, so there are nowadays we have like singers. We have a very she's a very uh, beautiful young kind of singer, and she sings everything in Yiddish. And of course it's kind of fun because you could just kind of listen to it and understand 80% of it.
Jeffrey, you want to?
Now, what proportion of Israeli immigrants to Germany take up German citizenship?
Well, the thing is that many of them already have it because we have about 100,000 um, 100,000 Israelis are holding German citizenship too, because they get to hold, dual citizenship. And so I can imagine that many of them who actually are like out of those 100,000, maybe the 24,000 that are now living in Germany right now. Are having that from their grandparents. Yeah. Let's see.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, then I guess I just want to say thank you very much, Annette, for this really stimulating and informative discussion. I learned a lot. I hope people in the audience who joined learned a lot too. And this has been recorded, so if there are any facts you want to revisit, you'll be able to go back and listen again. So thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you very much, Annette,
Yeah,
and
thank you
we
so
hope to
much for
see you
having me.
at thank you at another event in the future. So
Thank you so
until
much.
then, seid gesund und stark.
Yeah, thank you. I
Okay,
understood
thank you.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great. All right, thank you. Bye bye.